When the Magic Kingdom opened in 1971, there was a lot of interest in the space race. After all, we'd landed on the moon just 2 years before. So there was an idea to put in something that they called Mission to the Moon, which was this interactive sort of attraction, not really a thrill ride by any stretch of the imagination, and it was put in right across from me, right in that space where you see the orange and white. And then a few years later, it was updated to be Mission to Mars, which was a whole other idea, but used the same basic technology. They just switched it up to be Mars instead of the moon. And then from there, they decided that by the late 1980s or so, it really wasn't relevant to go to Mars anymore. But I wanted to share with you the history of Mission to the Moon, Mission to Mars, because it's a part of Disney history. So when Disneyland opened in 1955, there was a tremendous interest in space. And the U.S. space program was burgeoning. It was just getting started, and we were in a space race with the Russians, and it was really an amazing thing. And everybody was really excited and captivated by this idea of getting out into space and doing something. So by 1955, the Walt Disney Company had partnered up with the National Aeronautics and Space Administration to produce an attraction that was sort of a flight to the moon. And the concept was simple. They were going to show a command center and talk about what it's like to get ready to go to the moon. Then you were going to go into a sort of a simulator and actually go to the moon. So it had a certain 1950s kitsch to it to be able to make it to the moon.
Welcome aboard, friends. This is Captain Collins. The interior of this theater was carefully designed by scientists and engineers to look like a real passenger spaceship of the future. The eyes of the ship are the two TV screens called scanners. The one on the ceiling shows you where the ship is going, and the one on the floor shows you where you've been. Everything has been done to create a perfect illusion of a flight through outer space. In a moment, the bottom scanner will provide you with a dramatic view as we take off for our trip around the moon. We are rapidly leaving the Earth's atmosphere behind, and the upper screen shows our target, the moon, surrounded by the eternal blackness of space. Our target, the moon, still appears off to the side. The superimposed chart shows you the planned point of interception. The speed of our ship and the moon's own motion will bring us together in space at exactly the right time. Navigation through space requires a careful planning of position and speed of the ship at all times. For the second half of our trip to the moon, our ship must reduce its speed and prepare to circle around the moon. It is accomplished by turning the ship over by gyro and then traveling tail first, using our rocket engines for brakes. We'll show you the dark portions of the moon's other side in the light of flares released from our ship. As we complete our circle around the moon, the Earth again comes into view. Although the nose of our ship is now pointing precisely at the east coast of America, during the trip back, the Earth will, of course, continue to turn, bringing California, our destination, into the proper position for our arrival, as indicated by the superimposed crosshairs.
You have just experienced a flight through space, the flight of the future. It will be the final fulfillment of man's oldest dream, his dream to fly like a bird.
It really was kind of a neat attraction, especially for the time. You know, the magic and wonder of that was not lost in the 1950s. Now, the way they set it up was that it was called Flight to the Moon. And you went into a holding area, and you stood on a couple of platforms that had railings, and you were looking out into what looked like Mission Control. Now, Mission Control kind of evolved over time to look more like the Mission Control that NASA actually built at some point. But here was this Mission Control Center, and your host, Mr. Tom Morrow, great joke, right? And was introducing the whole thing to you. And he talked about space travel and getting ready to go to space, and as much as the U.S. knew at that point was pretty much included in there. And it was really kind of an exciting thing to kind of get involved in the space program. NASA had some influence on Disney. They had gotten some consultants from NASA to come in and talk about the space program and talk about what mission control would look like and those types of things. Then you moved on, went past a viewing port where you could see the rocket being serviced, and they were actually fueling it up, and it was really pretty cool. Then you would go into the vehicle itself. Now, the vehicle itself was one of two rooms. There were two chambers in both Disneyland and Walt Disney World. It was almost like a modern-day auditorium where you had seats that went up on a tier, and you actually sat down, but they went in a circle. So you were in a theater in the round, in a sense. And there was about 6 rows of seats that went up, and you sat in one of the seats, and you looked at the center of the theater. At the top was a view screen. At the bottom was another view screen, and around all the sides were view screens that had different information on them. You felt almost kind of like you were in some sort of vehicle. When you would actually launch, you would take off from the Earth, and you would see the Earth receding in the background on the lower screen, as though you had a camera pointed down as you were taking off. And what Disney would do, the Imagineers had come up with kind of a clever little device. It was the seat itself had a little bit of a pan to it, so it moved slightly. It actually lowered and raised a little bit, and it shook just a tiny bit. So you felt some of the things you might have felt had the rocket actually been moving. Now, when Disney World opened in October of 1971, the Mission to the Moon attraction was not quite ready to go into the park. But, as kind of a Christmas miracle, if you will, they did open the attraction on December 24th of 1971. About 2 months later, they got it open. And was essentially the same attraction at the Magic Kingdom in Walt Disney World. The theater was the same, the seats were essentially the same, and the show itself was mostly the same. Now, the show, for its part, when it finally opened in 1971, seemed a little bit dated at that time. Some of the sound effects were a little clunky, a little quirky. You know, you had these whirring sounds and something that sounded like a washing machine almost when you hear the thrusters on the rockets come up. But it still kind of worked to a degree.
Mr. Morrow, can you spare a few minutes to explain mission control to our passengers?
Of course, glad to. Welcome aboard, space travelers. The small TV monitors you see are keeping track of various activities here and out in space. So now we're here, are watching operations on the spaceport itself. We have tracking and traffic control and space mission monitoring. And also, we're receiving pictures from various Earth observation satellites. Let's have the repeater monitor, please. This is a picture you don't see very often. We are looking back from a spacecraft entering the Earth's atmosphere at about 17,000 miles per hour. The greenish glow is air being ionized by the tremendous heat generated through friction with the spacecraft.
Flight 92 is now ready for boarding.
On the large monitor, you can see your McDonnell Douglas lunar transport. The countdown is in progress and all systems are go. Have a pleasant flight.
Welcome aboard, ladies and gentlemen. This is your captain speaking. During our flight, I'll select pictures from television cameras mounted outside our spacecraft and put them on various screens in your cabin. We're on final countdown now, so I won't be speaking to you again until we're well on our way.
Now let's look at the moon. Out on the plane there, you can see one of our moon bases. Most of the living quarters and laboratories have to be underground for protection from radiation and meteorites. Of course, the moon does have its advantages too. For instance, it's a perfect observatory because there's no air. Also, gravity is only 1/6 that of Earth. And that has some very interesting effects.
Attention, please. We just passed through a shower of meteoroids, sometimes called shooting stars. We took a few hits, but we'll make it all right. Traffic control has given us a priority re-entry clearance. As you can see on the lower screen, we're almost back to Earth.
Well, the thing was that we'd already been to the moon. The U.S. had landed on the moon in 1969, so here it was 2 years later, and we were doing an attraction that was called Flight to the Moon. And that was a bit of a problem because it was a little bit dated. So in early 1975, Disney decided that they were going to make a change to the attraction and retheme it and make it a little bit more up-to-date. So they rethemed it as Mission to Mars. So while the concept remained the same, you would go in and see mission control and then get in the spacecraft and actually take a flight. The nature of it changed because now you were actually going to be flying to Mars instead of to the moon. The moon was passé at this point. Now, at this point in time, in 1975, there was a big interest in Mars. We had sent a probe to Mars, and there was a lot of information coming in about the angry red planet, and there was a lot of movies that had come out about Mars and some of the things that were happening. We had named some craters. We had some good footage of what it looked like, so there was a great opportunity to take this and make it a transition to Mars instead of going to the moon. So for about 4 months, the attraction was closed, and it reopened on June 7th of 1975. In the pre-show area, The big change there was Mr. Tom Morrow was gone, sadly, and he was replaced by Mr. Johnson. Now, Mr. Johnson is obviously a nod to Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas, which was the flight control center for Apollo missions and for any other missions that came up after that. So now the difference was, instead of seeing shots of the moon and astronauts around the moon, now you were seeing shots of Mars, and the voiceover talked about Mars instead of the moon. But essentially, everything else was the same. The voice of Mr. Johnson and Tom Morrow was George Walsh. Walsh was a broadcaster who lived in California, so he was the authoritative voice that provided the mission control person who was explaining to you everything that was going on at the control center. Now, Mr. Walsh has an interesting side note to his history with the Walt Disney Company. Once he retired from broadcasting, he actually took a job working on Main Street in one of the candy stores in Disneyland. So kind of a funny little twist of fate there, that's what he wanted to do after he retired from his career in broadcasting.
Welcome to Mission Control, space travelers. The first part of your trip to Mars today will be directed from this room, and so will your landing when you return to Earth. As you can see on the large screen behind me, we're keeping track of things on one of our many manned space stations now in orbit, while the small screens below show other activities being monitored by Mission Control. I'll have them repeated on the upper screens for you also. Now there you see how easy it is to get from one place to another. You simply float through the air. That takes some getting used to. In fact, they're so... Attention! Clear all channels for possible emergency re-entry. Oh no, not again. Stand by. Video signal coming in on all channels. Just as I thought. Somehow, this silly bird trips the emergency system every time he comes in. And I think he knows the laughs on us. Now on the large monitor, you can see your spacecraft waiting on the launch pad. Countdown is in progress and all systems are go.
But it was essentially the same thing. And, sitting in that theater, you kind of looked at it and you went, this is a little bit staged and a little bit silly, but it kind of works in a way. At least you get that specter of Mars. You get that feeling like you might be going and you can think about it a little bit more.
Ladies and gentlemen, we've just dropped our booster engines, and in a moment we'll make what we call a hyperspace jump, the new method of space travel which enables us to cover enormous distances in seconds. On the side screens, our ship's computer has drawn a diagram of our solar system, and we'll tip it over and move in closer so you can see where we're going. You'll notice that the orbital velocity of the planets is exaggerated, but as we approach the inner planets, you can see that they move with the proper relative speeds. Earth and Mars are anywhere from 35 million to 240 million miles apart at times, which used to make a trip to Mars pretty tricky. For example, spaceships had to follow a curved path for about 8 months to intercept Mars when it reached a certain spot. It was like having to hit a golf ball in California hard enough and accurately enough to make it go through one particular window of a train arriving in Florida that much later. Today it's much easier. We simply launch out into space until we reach Mars Acquisition Velocity, or MAV. Then we generate a hyperspace field around us for a short time. When we switch it off, our spacecraft is approaching Mars. Back in the 70s and 80s, this would have seemed like science fiction. For example, this gigantic rift in Mars' surface called Mariner Valley. It's over 3,000 miles long, 10 times bigger than the Grand Canyon back home. And for a planet that's only half the size of Earth, that's pretty impressive. This superimposed outline of the United States will give you an idea of its size. The wall there is almost 4 miles high, and the floor is about 50 miles across at this point. Even those branch canyons you see are 6 or 7 miles wide and go back as much as 100 miles from the main rift. This is no little canal by any means. Scientists estimate it was... Just a moment, please.
There was already a discussion underway at the Walt Disney Company that Mission to Mars was a totally dated attraction and they needed to do something else. Now, as you may recall, Walt Disney always thought about growing and changing and never staying the same and never standing pat with what he's got. So Tomorrowland was a vision of the future when he first opened the park in 1955. As he thought about things that he could enhance and create and do, he was always thinking about new things that he could put in there. He kind of figured that Tomorrowland would always evolve into emerging technologies and other things and become more than just the static look into the future from 1955. When Michael Eisner came on board, he decided that he wanted to grow the company on the whole. So he was looking at an idea called Tomorrowland 2055, where he was going to grow Tomorrowland into something much grander that would actually encompass a lot of these things and ideas. So Eisner threw down essentially a gauntlet for the Imagineers. Come up with something that's more engaging, more entertaining, and more interesting, but do it in a budget that makes sense. We'd prefer not to gut the entire attraction and redo it. It would be easier if we just kind of redid it, rethemed it, and made it more interesting. It would make sense to do some sort of space-themed thing where they could maybe meet an alien, have some sort of encounter with them or something. Now, going from that concept to actual reality took a fairly long time. So over the course of the next almost 2 years, a lot of ideas were passed around. The Imagineers reached out to George Lucas, and they thought he had a really bright mind for something that might be space-oriented. Now, several Imagineers had come up with the idea of using the 1979 movie Alien as sort of the premise for this. Now, if you've ever seen Aliens with Sigourney Weaver, this is a really kind of scary movie. It's the one that kind of set the bar for what horror films or space films in that genre should be. I think other films have tried to achieve that, but this one really set a bar that was a little bit different.
In space, no one can hear you scream.
So it was a pretty scary movie, I'd have to say, and it really was kind of terrifying in a lot of ways, but really, really well done. And I appreciate the fact that Disney wanted to take this. Now, this is not Walt's Disney in this case, because there's some different things here that they were thinking of. They were actually thinking outside the box and trying to make it the darkest, scariest ride they could think of. But again, not physically scary, just psychologically kind of scary, like the movie was. So that was kind of the concept, was to take that and work with the Nostromo. You'd be aboard the Nostromo and the alien would be there. Now, many designers in the early stages wanted to use the alien from the movie Alien simply due to the fact that so many people had seen the movies. Some Imagineers reportedly didn't like the idea and thought it would be too scary for the Magic Kingdom. When they approached George Lucas about it, he agreed with them. It was probably a little too scary for the Magic Kingdom. Eisner had wanted to kind of go down this path. But Lucas had gone back to Eisner and talked to Eisner and said, no, it's probably not right for the Magic Kingdom, and they rethemed it slightly as a result of that. Then Lucas was tapped to be the producer of the show. Now, George Lucas' company, Industrial Light and Magic, did some consulting on the design and some of the showpieces that were there, but Lucas himself never really showed up to help and was a producer really in only name. He only had that piece to the puzzle where he helped design up the overall show and the theme of the show. Now, you may ask, why George Lucas? Well, it had something to do with the success of his Star Wars franchise, but it had more to do with what he was working on at the time, which was Star Tours, which was the speeder to Endor that he was creating for Disneyland. But originally, the concept at that time was to create something that was a motion simulator. And here we were talking about the Alien Encounter that's kind of a similar thing, where it's not quite a motion simulator, but you're doing some things where you have a large-scale motion area. It was called the ExtraTERRORestrial Alien Encounter. And in most of the Disney marketing material, it was just called the Alien Encounter. They kind of left off the word extraterrestrial. This is because they wanted to tie it back to the 1979 Alien film and have that connection to it, because that was originally the connection they were working on when they were building the production. In some of the early promotional materials that they put out, the alien that they used would actually closely resembled the alien from the movie. So when the idea for the alien was scrapped, the Imagineers did decide that they could incorporate it in something else. At the same time, they were working on attractions for Disney's MGM Studios theme park. And they had this idea for a great movie ride, and they were going to take you through some of the great movie classics of all time and let you experience them in some way. They also thought about, what if we took people aboard the Nostromo and had people there and able to experience what Sigourney Weaver's character as Ripley experienced on board the Nostromo. And that became the idea for that part of the great movie ride experience. So nothing is ever lost at Disney, as we know. Michael Eisner actually inserted himself into the process and actually had some say over what was going on. Marty Sklar had a lot of influence in it, and there was a lot of people who had some input into the way the show was going to work. I was working there at the time, and I remember hearing some of the internal stories that we'd hear about. They were coming up with this story about how some alien was going to enter the Magic Kingdom through that attraction. And they came up with some ideas, and most of them were too tame, and Michael Eisner wanted to make them a little bit more intense and make them more interesting and compelling. Without being a roller coaster, could it be some kind of simulator where something would happen? So keeping the concept of staying within budget and coming up with something that was sort of an alien encounter, they came up with this idea for keeping the room the way it was and making it some sort of a spaceport where they could actually beam someone across the galaxy to some other distant land and bring them to meet an alien. And then the whole thing goes awry and the alien winds up coming into the park. Very innovative in its thought process. And the thing about it that's interesting is that it was more intense in the sense of being in your head rather than being intense in the sense of being on a roller coaster. It opened for a soft opening in 1994. And during that soft opening, there was a few guests that were invited to come and take it in and enjoy it, and they took feedback from those guests. Michael Eisner also went and saw it in 1994, and he was not impressed with the overall theme of it. He wanted it to be a little more intense. When he asked them to dial up the intensity, they actually closed the attraction for a few months and reopened it in early 1995. So there was a short window in there when it had a slightly different theme than it did when it was open for most of its run. Now, in the version that Michael Eisner saw before it was actually open to the general public, the director from Excess Technology was beamed into the showroom but was locked in and was banging on the walls to get out as you were leaving the show building. So the alien got out and they got him back in, and then the director was finally beamed in and he was banging on the walls. And it just kind of added a kind of a silly ending almost to the show, which is a little more Disney-like, but Michael Eisner didn't like that, so that part was actually cut out and they removed it back to you were just leaving after the alien was returned. And at one point, there was this rumor that probably is one of these rumors that was just totally false, but about one of the Disney executives who went in to preview it actually had a heart attack on the ride, and they had to make a change to it and tweak it down a little bit to make it a little bit less intense. Disney had come up with an innovative technique for providing sound that was all audio cues that made you think that you were actually seeing and feeling exactly what was going on around you. And they coupled it with some special effects like air jets and water and things like that that would really heighten the experience and make it more interesting. So it really was more of an auditory experience with a little bit of physical sensory experience coming from other things. And the seat would still pan up and down as it did during the two attractions previously. And they also came up with this idea of coming up with a harness that would lower down on you, that would lift and lower a little bit just to kind of intensify the effect just a little bit. The other thing they did was they sort of deprived you of the visual. For most of the show, it's dark in there. So it's a little more intense because you can't see anything. You don't know what's going to happen next. And these stories that build up about it being a little too intense kind of built that a little bit. And some of the things they did with the signage that they put outside. Prone to heart attacks or, any sort of problems, you should not ride this attraction. Pregnant women should not ride. People under the age of 12 shouldn't ride without their parents' permission. It was a clever way to kind of build the hype a little bit and make it seem even a little more intense than it might have been otherwise.
So join with me now, won't you? And together we will seize the future with access.
So when they came up with the final idea, it was called the ExtraTERRORestrial Alien Encounter. And the terrestrial was actually spelled with the word terror capitalized in the word. So it really kind of built that hype a little bit more. So they continued to use the Theater in the Round attraction, where you would sit there and hear the binaural sound coming in, and it would intrigue you. It finally opened in the Magic Kingdom at Walt Disney World on January 12th of 1995. Now, they had planned to put this attraction over at Disneyland as well. But due to the testing and the amount of time it took to produce it, and the fact that there was some guest experiences, guests were complaining that it was a little too intense, they decided to hold off on putting it at Disneyland for some period of time, and it never actually made it there. In terms of the show itself, it actually featured 2 complete show sets, just like Mission to Mars and the Moon Ride did. They were offset at a 5-minute interval on their start times to give the attraction a steadier flow. Each theater had approximately 180 guests, and so in a typical 2-hour operation, the show might be seen by 2,340 visitors. A lot of the shows and attractions featured performers that you would recognize from other venues, just other things that you would see. So, for example, in the ExtraTERRORestrial Encounter, Jeffrey Jones was your main host. He was the guy running the show. Now, Jeffrey Jones you may have recognized as the principal from Ferris Bueller's Day Off, among other films. In one of the pre-show videos, Tyra Banks is actually the person who is presenting the video, but it's actually someone else's voice that you hear, so you may not have recognized Tyra along the way. Tim Curry was the voice of Sir, the simulated intelligent robot, the audio animatronic character you would see in the pre-show area that used to be where the mission control was. Phil Hartman was originally cast to play that part, and he was called the Tom 2000, and that was short for Technobotic Oratorical Mechanism Series 2000. He played a little bit more of a bumbling sort of character and didn't really fit with the overall theme of what the attraction was. So as timing would have it, Phil Hartman actually died in 1998, and that allowed them the opportunity to replace out his character with the Sir character. So it just kind of worked out to Disney's advantage that they were able to replace Hartman with another character, in this case Tim Curry, to play the same role but in a much darker sense to make it fit with the overall theme of what the extraterrestrial alien encounter was all about.
Welcome to the great big universe of XS. I'm the XS 2000 Technobotic Presentation Unit, programmed to show you how to seize the future. Now you're probably asking, what could the galaxy's leader in sophisticated consumer technology possibly do for me? Well, how would you like to travel anywhere, anytime, at the touch of a button? Science fiction? Science fact. XS Tech is here on Earth to offer you, for a month's fee, the ultimate mode of transportation. Teleportation. Razzle. Right. Well, here we are. In case of feedback, disconnect power. Ladies and gentlemen, if you'll move on to our new testing lab, you can try XS teleportation yourself. Now, please gather your belongings and don't forget to seize the future with XS.
Welcome, weary travelers, to the great big universe of XS. You may call me Sir. That is SIR, which stands for Simulated Intelligence Robotics. What do you want, Skippy? No, you may not get out. You're a lucky volunteer. More. Imagine if the trip were not merely the width of this room, but the breadth of a galaxy, the span of a universe. Well, imagine no more, because soon one of you will be taking that trip. One of you will seize the future with XS.
And finally, you go into the main attraction, and this is the theater in the round again, where you're sitting down where you used to see the space things. What they changed was they put a giant tube in the middle of the theater, so it reached from top to bottom, and you were looking at this tube, and you had these shoulder harnesses that would kind of hold you in place.
Ah! People of Earth, greetings to each and every one of you. I'm Spinbone, XS Management Supervisor, speaking to you live from across the galaxy when we're all set for yet another spectacular demonstration. Dr. Bemis?
Hello. Look, I don't think
we should waste another moment. I couldn't agree with you more. Ready when you are, Doctor.
Thank you. The analysis modules above your head will now lower into place. Please remain seated in an upright position with your arms at your side. When the modules touch your shoulders, they will stop automatically, so remain seated and do not interrupt their operation.
I trust you are all impressed with our earlier demonstration in which a living creature was teleported a short distance in total comfort.
Clench and the two XS technicians are there to communicate live from across the galaxy via video screens. The two doctors that you hear talking throughout the show are Kathy Najimy and Kevin Pollak. Now, initially, a single guest is to be teleported out of the chamber for a meeting with Clench.
Now the time has come for one of you to experience something much more remarkable.
So, is everything on schedule?
Well, to tell you the truth,
What happened schedule? Excellent. Just selected a volunteer.
It's off.
Oh, good.
I've been seized.
Something you ate?
Seized with inspiration. I've recalculated our plan. You see, if we bring one of you here, well, just get to meet one of you. However, if I'm teleported to Earth, I can meet all of you.
Clench's impatience and the unexpected change of plans caused the teleportation signal to be diverted through an unknown planet, and as a result, a towering, winged, and carnivorous alien is beamed into the tube by mistake. Of course, chaos ensues, and the technicians don't know what to do, and they try to figure it out. The power goes out, so the lights are out, and now you're getting into the cerebral part of the show, where they're actually doing something that's stimulating your senses other than your eyesight. You feel the alien's breath on your back, sometimes he drools on you. All these different things are happening to make you think that perhaps the alien is in the room with you.
Analyzing now.
Well, what is it?
Okay, let's see. Ornithious, carnivorous.
Carnivorous? It eats meat?
Exactly, genius. Those people are in a lot of danger.
Now what's happening?
The teleportation tube is starting to break.
Broke the tube!
We cannot let it down!
Activate the warp switch!
Activating now!
People of Earth, do not worry. As long as those beams are on, the alien cannot fly out!
And then when the power finally comes back on, with the assistance of two technicians from XS, the ravenous alien is ultimately driven back into the broken teleportation device, but overpowering the tube caused the alien to explode right before the tube closes. Then you're released from your seat while the technicians bid you goodbye. Disney also added in pink noise that actually created some sort of feeling of disorientation in you as you listened to it because the lights were off. And because of the fact you were sitting in a circular theater, they could use some positional things to kind of help make you believe that that's actually happening. They did continue to use the seats as they moved, and the shoulder harnesses would move as well. And then also they added in some more subwoofers and some more transducers in each one of the seats to give the illusion that something was actually happening around you, so you could actually feel it and feel vibrations and so forth, as though the creature was kind of walking along next to you. And it was kind of interesting, and I thought it really worked out pretty well. The problem was it was always a little too intense for most children, and adults kind of got it the first time and then didn't really want to go back because it didn't have that staying power. So that's why the attraction ultimately closed in 2003. Some have called it the most horrifying ride that Disney ever produced. Many of the positive reviews of this ride expressed the awe that Disney could pull off such a subtle, scary adult experience in the parks. Not a Disney experience as you'd normally think of one. There were almost immediate complaints waged on the company for years about that particular attraction. The complaints were just pouring in, which on the one hand shows that they really did produce a powerful attraction. But on the other hand, there was a problem there, because this is the Magic Kingdom, and you want people to be happy, and you want guests to be able to come in. Children under 7 years old weren't allowed in the attraction or under 48 inches tall, and they warned children under 12 to have a parent with them. Understandable given the nature of the show, though after you kind of watched it once, you kind of got into it a little bit, and it was a lot of fun. Disney was trying to decide what to do with the show sometime in the early 2000s. They went back and forth about a couple of different ideas and how to close it and what to do with it. One of the things that kind of happened really had nothing to do with Disney. Actor Jeffrey Jones, the man who played Elsie Clench, had recently been convicted of soliciting child pornography, which is kind of a problem for Disney and their image. So they decided that it was probably in their best interest to go ahead and close the attraction given everything that was going on. So by early 2003, Disney made the fateful decision to go ahead and close the ExtraTERRORestrial Alien Encounter for good and to replace it with something a little more tame. Now here's where the challenge came in. They decided to replace it with something that was a lot more tame. They decided to replace it with Stitch's Great Escape. But Stitch was kind of a popular character. He had sort of a charm to him and people liked him, so it made sense to create an attraction around Stitch, I guess. It didn't really wow me that they wanted to come out with a Stitch-themed attraction, which essentially told the story of Stitch being captured and transported using the same cartoon characters that they had in the movie in the pre-show scene. And then they took you into an area where they had a policeman who was still the Sir character but now had a new voice, giving a slightly different spiel about how they transport aliens who are prisoners. And then you go into the main chamber, and instead of being the alien in there, it's now Stitch. And Stitch gets out, and he goes around the room, and he talks about terrorizing the princesses and whatever else. Yeah, that's great. I have to say that in my opinion, this is one of the worst attractions Disney has ever done. It felt like they just kind of took everything that was already there and just painted over it with a Stitch brush. Not that they really did anything clever and unique, not that they did anything interesting. They just kind of laid in these cartoons where everything else was, changed the Sir character, and then just put Stitch in the tube and then had him say some silly things. But I will just tell you that at least when it came to creating the Stitch audio animatronic, they had to think about how to make it move in a way that made sense. This is sort of that midpoint. They've created audio animatronics in the last few years that have been fully articulated and can do some things that are pretty remarkable. But in this version that was actually created around 2003 for opening in 2004, this audio animatronic is remarkably sophisticated. His ears wiggle, all of his hands move. He's got multiple hands. His eyes blink, his teeth open and close, his mouth opens and closes, so he can do some articulated movements with his face, much like you see in the cartoon. So this was a huge leap forward in the animatronic space, and that was a more remarkable thing than the attraction itself. Now, they did keep the binaural sound. They did keep a lot of the features of the ExtraTERROrestrial Alien Encounter. I haven't heard any rumors recently about anything they're planning on doing with Stitch's Great Escape, but I have to imagine somewhere in the Disney lineage, there's probably some thoughts about replacing it with something that's a little bit more sophisticated, interesting, or that could capture the nature of something maybe spacey-oriented or Tomorrowland-oriented or whatever. Today, this space sits empty. There's nothing in that space, but imagine what it was like back in the 1970s when it was both Mission to the Moon and then Mission to Mars, and kind of extending that into the late 1980s or so.